No.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, so my name is Teppo Laaksonen. I'm from Turku Science Park, and it's my privilege, pleasure, and honor to moderate this webinar today. The topic is how to commercialize your biomarker discovery. This is a first event from a set of 3 webinars focusing on biomarker commercialization process for researchers, SMEs, and tech transfer officers. I want to remind that this webinar will be recorded, so please take that into consideration. For me, this has been very interesting to participate and follow up this project. We are now discussing about BIC project, which will be described later on during this webinar. My background is in diagnostic industry, in smaller and larger diagnostic companies, and I have been looking this commercializing of biomarkers from the perspective of registration, quality assurance, product development, like also upscaling the production, and of course marketing and business point of view. Commercializing of biomarkers it has never been an easy task. There is so many operators involved in commercializing biomarkers. There is, I think, the most important from my point of view has always been the business of products developed based on some biomarker. So there has to be a good solid business. Then the next one is the security. All throughout the operations, from researchers to product, there has to be good sensible way to confirm the security of new biomarkers. And right now, we didn't know at the beginning of the project what will happen during year 2020, and now we are in the middle of corona pandemic, which has, let's say, it has increased the importance of biomarker commercializing projects generally. Specifically in Turku area, we have several, quite many, in fact, diagnostic companies, and many of them have been launched new diagnostic tests for corona diagnosis. Abacus Diagnostics, Arctic Diagnostics, Perkin-Elmer Walla Clubmaster is on the way to register their first product, to mention few. So we are in the middle of biomarker development here right now, which has been raising the importance of the fast track in regulatory process. And that is, let's say, a kind of new tool in biomarker development, how to tackle the new challenges in using the fast track when commercializing biomarkers. That will be seen in the future. So we were in the program 3 speakers. One of those, Otto Glader, was ill at the morning, so he decided not to give the presentation. We will have Valerie Daussin from Denmark. Then we will have Huram Konjen, and he will give a point of view from company's perspective. He is the CEO of Dianox company. So hereby, Valerie, can you start with your presentation?
Thank you for that. I'm Valerie, and I'm working at Aalborg University Hospital. I'm in charge of the business development here. So I've been for 10 years now in the hospital and have been very lucky to see quite a few biomarker inventions and trying to commercialize them. And quite quickly, we found out that they were quite difficult to commercialize because there is so many reglementation and regulation that are very, we need really to be aware of that to do that properly. So I've been lucky to be a project leader for the consortium for almost 3 years now, and we have learned a lot along the process, but I think also we have developed quite a very useful product for researcher and small company in order to support them through the process. That's the journey I present you.
I'm sorry, can I interrupt? For the audience, please, we will have questions and answer session after these presentations. But if you feel that you have very important questions right now during the presentations, you are free to ask immediately. And also write your questions on the message board. Thanks.
So I will start the presentation. And can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Yes, great. So the project is a European project financed by the Baltic Sea Region Interreg program. So we have we were 9 and now 8 partners from 6 different countries. And we have a mix between university, so technology transfer office from university, and cluster organization. The reason we built the consortium in the first place is because we find by discussing together that we have a common challenges, and it was how to translate those biomarker discovery into something which is clinical viable. There were a lot of validation that we needed to secure for making the industry interested. There were a gap between the scientific knowledge and the commercial knowledge about those invention. As a TTO responsible, it was really sometimes very difficult to know which criteria we should apply for choosing the right project. And we find also that industry and investor, we had quite a lot of difficulty to communicate with each other. Maybe the language is not always the same that you use in the research and in the industry. So there were some gap and miscommunication on those specific invention. So what we did is we decided to build a consortium, and our goal was to develop some support tools for researchers and SMEs. And in order to do that, we started to contact a lot of stakeholders and conduct interviews just to confirm the challenge we had identified, but maybe also to open up a little bit the challenges around the topics. And then that we have conducted the interviews, and some of the information we get that were just a confirmation of what we knew, but some of the things were maybe more surprising. I will go through them quite quickly. When we spoke with researchers, we found out that most of them had a very strong knowledge in the science, of course. If we were speaking with researchers from the clinic, they had also very good understanding about what the marker could be used at the clinical, so what the clinical need and the clinical use could be. So the technical and scientific and the clinical part of the development, what not really the problem for working successfully toward a project. But we also found quickly out that the regulatory part of the process was something they had no knowledge about, or very few knowledge about, and also not that much interest. The IPR issue, which are very important from an industry point of view, were also very often seen as a limitation, because you have to think patent first before you have to publish, and you have also to file and maintain patent rights in order to transfer to the industry, and that was sometimes a little bit competitive interest compared to what the science normally focus on. And then we found out that, yeah, generally they were very interested for supporting tools, more training, more understanding of the process, and more help to transfer those good ideas into something which was clinical viable. We spoke also with large companies, and of course, from their point of view, it's another perspective they look at. Of course, they want good science and good documentation and good validation results, but they also want to start with the market and clinical need, which was not always in place with all the invention we were screening as a TTOs. They confirmed for us that they had some expectation before they were interested to look into some results. So the level of maturity should be at least a proof of concept most of the time. For them, it was really necessary that you had patent rights, because otherwise it's very difficult to invest what is necessary. And sometimes the bridge between good science and a proof of concept could have difficulty to be reached. So that was something they were very aware about. From the small company perspective, what come up from the interview was a little bit different, because they have more difficulty, mainly because they don't have access to the large expertise that a large company has. So they have really more struggle with penetration on the market, finding out the reimbursement issue, access to clinicians, access to clinical samples when they needed to work on validation. So their interest in the supporting tool for the workflow was actually very positive feedback for our project. It was a very interesting discussion to go in the clinic and speak with the doctor there, because actually most of them, where we were speaking that we were working with biomarker, they really didn't use that as a expression. So most of the people we were speaking with, they told me that they were not working with biomarker, which was very surprising if we were in the clinical biochemical department. But most of the time, what we found out is the decision about including a new in vitro diagnostic based on biomarker in the clinic, maybe a decision taken on national regulation, or that it's very rare that the decision taken locally. So that sounds that they were not that much involved in the decision process. And finally, with the TTOs, the main challenge for working with biomarkers in discovery, it's a very long process. It takes really long time to make good documentation, to validate. It takes most of the time 3 to 4 years to achieve a proof of concept, which is mature enough to go in the next steps into a commercial product. And that's really a struggle for TTOs, because when you begin to go further in the process, the patents are very costly. And most of the time, as a research institution, we need to patent very early. So there were some issues there that were a big limitation for the successful commercialization of biomarker discovery. The investors, it was very difficult actually to discuss with them on that topics, and mainly it was because there is very few of them who are very interested in that specific field. The diagnostic field and the biomarker specifically is not really high interest for the investors, because it's costly, it's not that much return of investment, and there is a lot of insecurity about the investment for them. So it was not that much to know, and we really have to find some investor who have that field as an interest. Maybe it will change right now, because everybody agreed that good diagnostic are important right now. And then we spoke at last with a cluster organization in the 6th country, and we found out that actually very few of them have biotechnology, biomarker and life science has a sole area of expertise. So it means that it's really difficult for a cluster to have a proper personalized I'll say process in the field, because most of the time you need to cover a very large group of industry. So in Denmark, we have had a cluster organization for many years, specialized in the life science and the biotechnology, and especially in the biomarker and personalized medicine. But in the 6 countries we were working in, they were the only one to have this specific focus. So we have, after those interviews, and we had more than 80 people interviewed during the first period, we decided to work for the development of specific tools, and we decided to focus on 4 specific tools. The first one, and of course the largest one, is what we call the BIC Guide, which is a support tool for guiding the researcher or the small company through the process from a discovery to a launch on the market. I will present it more in the detail in a few minutes. Then we have collected a lot of best practice handbook, especially towards the TTOs, that presents good practice, but also pitfalls from working as a TTO and trying to commercialize biomarkers. We have developed also for TTO a specific guide for screening and selecting the best biomarker invention that we are more chance to successfully be able to support during the process. And finally, we have tried to develop some guidelines based on the new regulatory in the IVDR area, which were understandable for scientific and not necessary for people from the industry in the detail, but at least so you know exactly when you need to be aware of some specific aspects. So I will start to introduce you to the BIC Guide, and what I will do is practice open it directly because I have it here. That's how it looks like. And what we have done is we have developed the BIC Guide based on 7 phases. So from biomarker discovery until commercial launch. However, right now we have only developed the 5 first phases because it was actually a very detailed work, and we wanted to cover properly all the phases who are happening as researchers before we were going to tackle the later phase who are more driven by the industry. We intend to work on those tools as phase by the end of this year, but right now we have focused on the first five phases. Then I go up again. Then under each phases, we have developed different aspects. We have first a description of what the phase is about and what you have achieved when you have finished with your phase. And each phase is developed in 3 tracks. And if you look the track, there are 3. You have one where we have focused on the technical and clinical performance. We have one where we have focused on the commercial aspect of the biomarker development. And the last part is more guide about the regulatory issues that you should begin to integrate in your process, in your discussion in the group, and which part you should get a kind of introduction, not necessarily provide material which is specific for regulatory process afterwards, but just making those notions a little bit more integrated in your process earlier. Under each phase, so we have put a list of tasks, and under each task we have tried to explain what we mean with that task and what you should do. And in some of the tasks, we have developed some supporting documents, or we have linked to guidelines or European rules, or also to tutorials. We have also developed some templates. So sometimes, for example, best practice on patient consentment. We have also linked sometimes with our best practice handbook and or regulatory guide on those aspects. So you will be able to open some supporting documents depending on the topics if one is available. And that's how we have developed. So you have that on all the tasks that we have listed in the 3 tracks. For example, yeah, you need to make a funding plan, and there is some in the commercial aspect. At least there is some of those tasks that you will have to reintroduce every time, because yeah, what is next step and what is next step? How you finance the next phase of your research? How do you secure access to clinical samples? So it's a guide. It's not you have to do this way, but it's an invitation to follow a systematic process. Then you are sure that you don't skip steps, and then you arrive with 2 years later and you have forgotten some important aspect in your development plan that may have consequences on your result and the validity of your results. At the end of each phase, we have developed some specific document where it was relevant. For example, at the end of the phase 1, typically what you will do is you will contact your TTO and make a report of invention. And then we have, for example, here developed a tip for a good declaration of invention, which elements you should report to your TTO, because that's what they want to see and that's what they want to make their own evaluation on. We have also tried to explain a little what is about intellectual property, what it is you can patent when you have a biomarker discovery, and which part you will have to discuss with the patent attorney about. So, and that's a process, you will find it through all the phases. So now we have seen phase 2, but it will be exactly the same in phase 3, 4, and 5. When you come further in the process, for example, in phase 5, of course, the task related to the commercial part begins to be a little bit more consequence. For example, making a business plan properly, or beginning to prepare a licensing agreement, or all those aspects that. But it's also thought as you start early with the clinical need in the first phase, and then you begin to look at the competition, the market competition, but you build along with the project those material until you come at a very mature project where you begin to have a very deep and detailed market analysis, business plan, and this kind of important document that will secure the validity of your project. For the regulatory part, in the first 5 phases, we have mainly tried to introduce good practices, because again, the proper regulatory work start a little bit later on, when you begin to have a proof of concept, and then you begin to develop a final product development. But there is some aspect during the regulatory process that you need to have in mind, that they will be important at some point. What we are doing, I will go back to the presentation. So that's something I already explained. Oh, I need to come back. So that the big guide at its first version that you have just seen. What we have done is for a period of 6 months, from October last year to March this year, we have a 16 group of researchers and companies testing the tool, give us feedback about what's working fine, what's working not that good, and now we are making a new version that will be completely available and free of charge on internet during what we have get as a collection from the pilots we have run for 6 months is everybody think the project was interesting and the tool was great because it's helped to keep this overview. It helps to have this process and this thematic in the way of developing. We have tried to do that as much as possible, intuitive and easy to use. But we will have to, of course, to change, and that's why we are now making a version 2. So not everything was good, but generally the content part was very complete in many ways, and we decide together with our advisory board that was not the part we should focus on now, where we are almost going to achieve the project and release the tool. But we should look more at the working flow, at the user friendliness and this kind of thing. We want also to make a few improvements, such as be able to do your own checklist, and we will integrate also a self-evaluation tool at the end of each phases, where you will be able to take yourself a kind of intern checkup about, I am the right direction, or is that some aspect I have maybe not really worked on properly, and then I need to go back in a group. It can be difficult sometimes to find out if you are in phase 2 or 3 or 3 and 4. So it's not that because you have a must-do task or something else, but it's mainly to say that there is some tasks that you have to have, there is some material and validity you have to be able to convince an industrial partner or investor. So if you don't have done that in the phase 2, you should do that no later than the phase 3, because otherwise you will at some point having a lack in your development plan that you will have consequences when you will go further in the process. That was for the big guide. Then we have developed this best and practice handbook, and now you can see how the cover look like. It's really on the way to be published, I hope in the next few weeks. So if you follow us on our LinkedIn profile, you will be able to get access to the best practice handbook very soon. What we have done with the best practice handbook, we have really looked at the project at the process from a TTO perspective. So we have collected experience from TTOs from our network. So mainly, of course, in the 6 countries, but a little bit broader. We had also some contact in a few other countries, and we have approach the process and the difficulty we have with the biomarker development and commercialization based on those topics. Of course, the commercial aspect, the business model aspect, the intellectual property aspect are typically what we are dealing as a TTO, but you can also have an experience with some scientific choice we have done. Maybe we should have done that properly. So it's more an experience sharing and not necessarily how you should do things, but that's how you can be successful or less successful based on experience. So for example, we have worked really much about the scope of a patent protection, because you often hear that the biomarker cannot really be patentable, but yes, they can. But of course, it's not that easy. So it's about having a good collaboration with your patent attorney and having this right discussion about what is the invention. Is that the marker? Is that the panel of marker? Is that the way you use it on which technology platform and this kind of thing? So we have tried really to integrate all this consideration. We have tried also to integrate such a complicated notion for people who are not patent specialists, the freedom to operate. Yes, you can have an invention which is new, but if you are dependent of the invention of someone else, so maybe you are not able to commercialize this, and that's what we call the freedom to operate. So trying to explain that in an easy way for non-specialists, those aspects. Then we have developed a third tool, which is a screening and selection guide for TTOs. And again, based on the experience is in your TTO, you have a lot of different expertise, and some are specialists in that field, some are not. I have a legal background, so I can tell you that it's not always easy to work with biomarker invention when you have this kind of background. So the question for us is to support the TTO to ask the real question when they are going to make their commercial evaluation on an invention. What is important? Is that sensitivity and specificity? Is that the different kind of other parameters that will give you good science results, which are important? How you define the clinical need, who are your competitors, and this kind of thing. So we have developed this guide, and it will be also available on our website very soon. And finally, we are developing and finalizing right now a guideline for regulatory process. And what we have tried to do with that guideline is not really to explain the regulatory process in the way that you can just follow it and then you can get your IVDR accepted by the regulation, but it's really to explain the process along with the process on biomarker development, which parameters you need to integrate, when can you begin to see the classification you will be on, what are the parameters you will decide with that. And we didn't try to develop such a guide to replace an expert in the field, because that's not the point. We really try to explain for non-specialists what the regulatory process should impact in your development plan on the future of your commercialization process. So we have made a few illustration, and we have really tried to follow the big guide, 7 phases, and translate that along with the regulatory process to say what is important right now. What do I need to be aware of in order not to have an issue later on? So that was for my presentation on the tools that we have developed during the project.
Okay, thank you, Valerie. Just one question: can we publish these presentations later on?
Of course.
Okay. How, Huram, is it okay?
Yes.
So,
thank you.
Is there any short questions at the moment for Valerie? Then I think we will continue, and then Mr. Huram Konjen from Dianox company will make his presentation. Please.
Thank you, Teppo, and thanks, Valerie, and thanks for having me. It was an incredibly useful overview of BIC. I wasn't quite sure who the people were that were attending this meeting, so it's not, at least good to have a feel of the level of knowledge that goes in here. My name is Huram. I'm the CEO of Dianox. I run a diagnostic startup where we're developing a platform for non-invasive diagnostics. And essentially, our vision is that we want to be able to test for infectious viruses through saliva without the need for medical staff or lab analysis equipment, because that could really improve the scalability of some of the tests that are really urgently needed for HIV and for hepatitis around the world. And I have Christian Code here with me during the presentation. He's my CTO. I'm not sure if he has speaker rights yet, so if he does get them, Chris, feel free to jump in and say hi. Meanwhile, I'll just continue the presentation. I prefer having a more interactive talk than just me presenting, so feel free to drop any questions you have continuously. What I was thinking of doing was telling you a little bit about our company, how we started, and how we transitioned into using BIC. And I'll give you a live demo as well how to use it in practice, and then you guys can see for yourself if you find it useful or if you have any questions around that. So basically, we started Dianox a year ago, and I think in contrast to some of the other companies that you come across in this industry, we're not a spin-out. That's what we see the most often, spin-outs from universities or from large companies in biotechnology. And now our company started in Asia. We participated in some workshops in Singapore that were targeting global health problems. And so we really were diving deep into clinical needs to figure out what's needed on the market for diagnostics, for treatment. And after doing a lot of work and talking to medical experts from all around the world, from Africa, from Asia, from the US, we figured out what we wanted to do and developed a strong concept from that. So our project sort of started from the user need rather than us developing something cool in the lab. And from that, we built on it and recruited a stronger team. And then we're essentially now working backwards toward the technology and trying to develop that to match. So if we're looking at something like the BIC tool, I think one of our first steps might have not aligned with the process of BIC because right after we dived into the clinical need, I think we started writing a business plan, which doesn't come until like phase 5, I think, something like that, because it really helped us to conceptualize some of the challenges that we would face, and just to make sure that we really to structure what we need, what our gaps are. And when we started with the BIC tool, I think we didn't have a clear overview of the process of like what happens in this industry. What are the things that we need to do? So I think for that was really useful for us to get to get BIC. The first thing we did after flying back to Denmark was we talked to a few consultants in the industry, and the consultants were basically they were showing us a few ways of how you can do how you can commercialize something like this, and not like what the process looks like, what we need to do. But it was much of a black box. So we didn't actually know what we needed to do as much as we knew that we needed to pay a consultant. I think the last estimate we got was somewhere around just under €1 million, and it said it takes somewhere between 3 to 4 years to commercialize this thing from A to Z, including the regulatory aspect. So it doesn't really give you much of a learning opportunity, unfortunately, as a startup or as a researcher trying to do something in this field. And that's where BIC really was incredibly useful to try to not just get through the process, but really learn what the different steps are, so we get smarter in doing them the next time. Now, you saw the BIC tool a little bit when Valerie showed you, and there's a lot of text. I mean, you got a bit of an idea of it, but it's incredibly overwhelming. So even though it has a really nice overview of the process, it can just be daunting to sort of dive into that. And the first thing I thought of at the time was is that saying like, how do you eat an elephant? Just one bite at a time. So our task sort of became to try to make the BIC tool digestible, so we can start working on it. And what we did from the original tool that we took, we tried to integrate that into a project management tool, and that really helped us make everything actionable from the questions that are in BIC. And I can show you guys some of that right now. And just see here. I'm assuming you guys can see my screen. If not, I'm hoping Teppo will jump in. Okay, so this is our project management tool. It's called Asana. I think you can use any project management tool, really. We prefer this one. And I created a dummy project to show you some of the functionality around it. So we have a team that we created around a COVID-19 test. And you have the ability to add team members and add all the information. I see some of them haven't uploaded their pictures yet, but you have the ability to actually add a lot of information about the team members as well, which might not seem super useful, but it has a function for later on for when you want to build a quality management system, for instance. But I think Chris will get more into that later. So this is basically a mirror image of the content of BIC. So this is the first phase, and we have the technical aspects of it in the first section, and then the commercial aspects, and then the regulatory aspects. And basically, what this allows us to do is create a task around it and assign ownership. So I can actually assign this section to someone. And add another subtask to it to document. So we can go into that as well and write down what we've been working on, and even list some of the literature we've been reading to actually to supplement this. And all this is incredibly useful for sharing documentation, because in my experience, I think a lot of these questions are actually already answered, or at least considered in some aspect by a good team. But we kind of want them to be written down, because that's a lot more useful for regulatory purposes later on. But also when you're onboarding team members, it can actually be in a startup. It can be very difficult to onboard a team member. Like, we're looking at onboarding someone next week, and we need to push some of the other tasks that we're doing to onboard them, because it can actually take a while just to get them up to speed. And that's why something like this is incredibly useful, because you just write down all the things that you're doing, and the first task of onboarding someone, it can basically be, you can just assign them that they need to go through these documents and read up on what you've been doing, and then they can sort of just be up to speed on that. And I can show you one of the functionalities here that's been incredibly useful for us is the timeline. No, it's 1 second. I think it takes a while to load. Now, this is classic for presentations. All right. Yes, the presenter's curse. It's not loading right now, but it's essentially a Gantt chart. And what it does is it shows us all these tasks that we're working on. We set a start date and an end date, and then we have the option to say if they're delayed or in progress, or if they're completed, and it gives us that overview of the timeline. It's an incredible, that's an incredible tool for learning, not just for your own team, because you'll have a good idea of what to do the next time. Because one of the I think one of the lessons that you need to learn in the startup is the first thing that you're doing might not succeed. So say the first biomarker project you're working on, for one reason or another, at one of these steps just ends up failing, then you want to do it again, but you can't just adapt the documentation here, because it's specific. I think for us, for instance, we were working with the Australia antigen for a long time. We've been working on that. And then since the coronavirus came out, we decided to do something on the spike protein as well. Now, those are two very different biomarkers, so we really needed to create a new project for that. So it gives us that ability, we have that learning from the first project in terms of what the resources that we need, the roles that need to be filled, and how long each task takes. So we have a very good indication of the grant that we're applying to, for instance, what kind of budgets we need to set for that and these things. Let me see here. I think I have a few other things that we're working on right now. On I think our next mission with this tool is to enrich it with some other data points and some other tools. For instance, for a quality management system, we're looking at a Danish startup where we can integrate some aspects of this with that other tool, because you need some pragmatic functionality around some of these documentations. For instance, if I write something in here on the clinical need, then I need to I need to sign it, and then I need to send it to someone else to read it, and then that person needs to sign it as well, and then that sort of becomes an approved document. And once you send it to all the team members to read and sign, it becomes part of the learning, the learning process, and all these things actually go into the regulatory aspect. So it's very useful to have some more practical functionalities around the BIC tool. And on top of that, we're also using another tool called Mendeley for the literature, because we need to score the papers that we're reading, the articles that we're reading, and that'll be useful when we're getting closer to having a dialogue with the regulators. Now, I think at this point, instead of me just like going through all the last bits, Chris, can you do you have your mic settings?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can hear me. Yeah, very good presentation, Huram. So if you notice that Huram and I are actually in different places. So, and we're both in Copenhagen, but we work virtually a lot of time. And during COVID-19, this was absolutely essential. But this kind of tool and its functionality allowed us to work virtually, both with with different CROs and with each other, and basically the R&D, a lot of the stuff that we did with the COVID-19 project, we did all that virtually, from writing together, developing, doing all the literature searches, putting into Asana and this project tool. So it was very quick and really nice for a small company to do this. I can imagine, like, a much larger company might have a harder role in doing this kind of things virtually, where you might need FaceTime or might need specific people. Yeah, regarding the people on top, it's very important to have the right people, and we can attach their CVs to their pictures, basically, because this is very important for like the QMS system. When you have to write SOPs and have to have people sign for them, it's very important to have basically the right people. What else?
And I think these sections as well. I think one of the key things that we've been doing is actually just divide up the sections. So we have one person in charge of the regulatory. I'm in charge of the commercial development, and Chris has been in charge of the technical development. And I think just having that, like just scoping a little bit, is tremendously useful for a company.
Yeah, and other kind of tools that we've been working with. We also been working with Google Drive. We could link things. So this kind of functionality allows us to do a lot of things. I think we also wanted to add, at some point, some, because the IVDR is mainly for Europe, but we're also looking into the FDA. So we could add some sort of functionality to sort of that kind of biomarker development and IP development in there at some point. So it allows us a little bit of room. Secondly, I don't know if you can still hear me. Yeah, secondly, if you see that you could actually add some templates, for example. And we've been writing these from freehand, but it'd be interesting to actually add templates to these kinds of tools to make it a lot faster. So if you think about going from the initial biomarker discovery to actually commercialization, we hope that we could reduce that time by using this kind of functional tool like Asana.
Absolutely. I think that the templates were have been a tremendous help. So we've gotten some templates from another company as well, and I think that's probably the major selling point of using using a tool like this is it allows you to save so much time, because a lot of the work that you're doing is a little repetitive. I think especially for something like building a quality management system, you have a lot of documents that you can copy paste and then adapt to your needs instead of having to rewrite them. And especially if you're coming from a research background, like Chris has a background in biophysics and is working last decade as a researcher, I think it can be it can just be plain uninteresting to be honest, to be looking at some of these regulatory aspects. I think if you're a scientist, you're interested in the science, and if you're working with business strategy, as I am, you're interested in the commercial development. So it's nice to be able to save some time on those things. I think speaking of time, I think I might have gone a little over.
Okay, so that was very good to hear about the good experiences. So now we have time for questions from the audience. So do we have any interested?
Do you guys have any questions, Teppo, Valerie?
Yeah, I was thinking one question for you both, thinking about the importance of specifically the business when doing and developing new biomarkers. Do you feel that this project these tools can bring the university researchers and the commercial companies closer to each other, so that they better understand what they are doing, and so that already at the beginning the researchers do things that are very valuable in the end of this commercialization? Do you feel that
Absolutely.
This will, yeah?
Absolutely. I think one of the funniest things that we experience so often is when we have a partnership with the University of Denmark, and when we bring that up, we see people holding their breath because investors and even our attorneys, I think, did this, and they have these notions around how tech transfer offices work. And they are very careful around it. So as soon as you mention that you have a partnership with the university, it's not necessarily a positive feedback that you're getting. They're really worried that, oh, do you have the real right agreements in place? Do you have because even if you say you do, they keep repeating that it can be very crucial. It can be very crucial to know who owns the IP.
Yes.
So I think this kind of goes both ways. To sort of make that process a little more transparent. And I'll be honest, when we spoke to our tech transfer office, we were a little worried because of all the frustrations that other people had told us about. But our experience has been tremendously positive. I think we had the conversation we had with 2 or 3 people from the tech transfer office have been very pleasant, and they've been incredibly helpful. And I think I've seen some of the mistakes that I've seen in other people's contracts were definitely not present in ours.
Yeah. Okay. Very good to hear.
Additionally, I think that you could also work sort of in parallel on both sides. So on the business side, you could work, the business people could work, and then on the science side, you could work, and then they somehow meet in the middle, and that could just drastically reduce time rather than building a biomarker and then suddenly realizing you have a business and then going from there.
Yeah.
I think that was also the whole point going into this project. It was to have a better understanding about what is the expectation from a TTO to the researcher, and what a researcher may expect from the TTO, and how to build this collaboration, which is so important to be successful. nobody can work alone in that field. Huram, you were speaking about the importance of people, but exactly that's that. You don't expect your researcher to be a commercials expert. You don't expect him to be a regulatory expert, but he needs to understand those concepts in order to collaborate with the TTO and later on with the industry to make it a very good collaboration and a good experience. So that was really what we wanted to achieve with that project.
Yeah. Then I have another question related to this fast track. We've now experienced with this COVID crisis that the importance of fast track. Has this already considered in these tools? How to be able to use the fast track from regulatory point of view and validation point of view?
I'm really not a regulatory expert, but what I have understand when I heard at least the Danish medicine agency speaking, it was that the fast track was a very specific time and specific circumstances, but they had no intention that to be something in the future to be a normal procedure. So no, we haven't really make any adjustment with that.
Yeah. If that is someday going to be, let's say, more routine, then it might need to be considered.
Yeah. What I think is right now we have based our work on the new regulation, and now the new regulation has been postponed, but still when you are with biomarker development anyway, it takes time. So we will come fast to the new regulation to be integrated. There is a lot of people now not understanding that new regulation. So we have, we hope that with the material we have developed, we will make it a little bit more accessible for people who are not experts and know that they are going to go through during the process.
Yeah, that makes these tools even more important because of this changing period from old regulations to new one. The new ones, of course, they need to be adapted in the tools. So, do we have any questions from the audience?
Teppo, they can't ask as they are muted, but if you undock the question pane, you can see the questions there. Could you do that? Can you see the questions?
All right. Now I missed it.
Are you seeing those questions?
Yeah, wait for.
You have to stretch the pane a bit to see the whole question.
Okay, there is a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Oh, we have 3 minutes, so it's fine.
Okay, now I'm. Well, let's see. Yeah. I opened the questions, but I don't see only one question there. Is it on the chat?
No, they are on the question pane. They should be sent to you. But
Mari,
if you, yes.
I think we are running out of time. So can you read out the question for the speaker?
Yeah,
I only have one question.
Okay, then I will read the questions out. So Willem Mees van de Biel has asked if you could explain where in the BIC guide steps the development of the mechanical device aspects comes in. For example, the sample collection, handling, the result interpretation, and user interface design. Usability is important, especially in POC. Wait, I have to. Or self. I'm sorry, I don't see the question.
Or self-test applications.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
I'm not sure I understood completely the question, but I think what he asked is about when we begin to introduce the notion about samples collection and authorization to use that further in the process. Is that what the question is about?
Yes.
Yeah, I think we have been actually very aware, because we are working with clinicians here, that you have to plan your collection of samples very early and what you want to do that, because we are aware that depending on the consentment you have get for the collection of the samples, you can really have trouble later on if you want to reuse some of the samples for further validation. So actually quite early, I think already in phase 2, we have some explanation about, at least it's more good tips, you know, about when you are applying for your collection at the ethical committee. Try to see a little bit further than only the project you have now, but see if maybe 2 or 3 years ahead what you could eventually reuse your samples later on, because if you don't integrate that in the beginning, then you will have issue later on. I hope it answers the question.
I hope as well. Thank you. And one more question from Patrick Hollos. He asks for Valerie. It was interesting to see at the interview conclusions that it was difficult to discuss with investors and they are less interested in biomarkers. Were the investors from EU or from US and other parts of the world as well? Also, on the same line for EU-USA market, does the best practices or the online tool cover background that would help preparation in parallel for US regulations?
Yeah, yeah, it's maybe different things in one question. I will try to do my best to answer that. The investor we have spoken with were mainly in the 6 countries, but we had also quite a few contacts in England and in France. There is no doubt that in the Scandinavian country and the Baltic Sea region, there was very, very few interest to speaking on biomarkers. When you came in a little bit larger country like France and England, and then you have some investors who have specialized themselves and who have more interest, but you really need to be in the network of those people by finding the right people to discuss. We haven't looked as far as the US. It was not really possible in the scope of the project. And I think nobody in our group had that much experience with discussing with investors from the US. And for the US market, yes, it's something, a consideration we had about FDA versus European regulation, but again, we had only 3 years to develop something useful, so we decided together with our advisory board to focus on the European regulation, because that's what we were able to do in a detailed way and structured way. Otherwise, we should have used two more years and think before achieving a result. Unfortunately, I know it's very relevant, but we had to make some choice.
Thank you, Valerie. At the moment, there are no more questions in the question tab.
There was one question related to where will this tool be published and when?
The plan right now, of course, now it's not available because it's only the test version, and we don't want to disappoint people with a non-finished version. So we have kept it only to a small group of people who have been a part of the pilots. But it will be available in July or latest in August, and it will be primarily on our website, so biomarker.nu. But we are also in discussion with the IATRIS association for them to provide an access to the tool through their platform, because they have this kind of association in order to reach the researchers, at least who are our primary goal.
Yeah.
And so we hope it will be available through different partnership, and the idea is a tool to be completely available. So we will try to enter as many agreements with all the people interested to link to it, so we can reach larger population.
Okay, thank you. So finally, I thank you, the speakers, and I thank you, the audience. This was very interesting webinar today, and let's wait for the next on the line. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
See you.
Bye.